Hello everybody, I'm Mike from the Rewatch Podcast, and I am a lifelong Trekkie watching classic Doctor Who for the first time, and I am back here talking about the fourth episode of the Daleks serial, namely The Ambush. Apologies again for the slightly gross, blurry background. I'm doing another pre-work, early morning recording again here, so need to blur the background, but I hope that doesn't detract from your enjoyment of this episode. Before we get into this, just want to remind everybody that likes, subscribes, shares are very much appreciated. Lots of great conversation going on the comment sections of these videos, and I will do my best to acknowledge and interact with as many of those as possible, time permitting. And just one thing that came out of that actually, and I feel really foolish as well, is I asked in the last episode about whether it's ever clarified what the subjects were that Barbara and Ian taught, because I felt that with the emphasis on education and knowledge and learning, and the acquisition and sharing of knowledge, that would have some significance. And it was pointed out that, of course, that is mentioned. It's made really clear in the first episode. We even see Susan studying a history book and remarking that that's not how that happens. So, yes, science and history, of course, were the two subjects, and they're the thematic tentpoles of the series, historical and science fiction. So, of course, they're the subjects that they're studying. But I guess I was right in the sense that they do hold significance, but maybe I think that memory was lodged in my subconscious. Yeah, thank you for helping me uncover that little brain fart. But anyway, enough preamble, let's get into it. I want to watch some Doctor Who. We're chugging along through the Dalek serial, and it's good stuff so far, so let's see where we go today. Oh yes, Ian the Dalek. Dalek Ian. Oh, the claw. Doctor Who, even from my vague memories, was great at those iconic, creepy images, that would haunt your 6-year-old brain. Somebody pointed out in the comments as well that I was right in the sense that there is a lot of corridors and caves, as there should be in any classic science fiction series. So another classic sci-fi trope as well, isn't it? We see this in Star Wars, the pretending you're a villain and you're holding our heroes captive by as a means of escape.
The council wishes to question the prisoners. I have not been informed. Wait.
Is that the plunger is actually a bullshit detector that the Daleks use. I think the other thing about the Daleks is that childhood fear, just getting to school, of being shouted at. That was always a threat, at least when I was growing up. The teacher's going to shout at you. That was always a genuine primal fear as a child, is a voice being raised. And, the Daleks are kind of a, not personification of that, but a representation of that. Or you're going to get trapped in a Dalek exoskeleton. It's kind of hard to understand what the Daleks are saying some of the time. Maybe that's just me. I love hearing Ian talk as a Dalek. It's like crafty Dalek, stressed Dalek, happy Dalek, frustrated Dalek. Guess you're a Dalek now, Ian. There's a great sci-fi trope in its infancy, the laser cutting through the door. That's pretty smart. They're not dumb, these Daleks. I mean, sometimes, villains, have to be stupid. The writers need them to be stupid in order for our heroes to advance and endure. But, the Daleks, they're kind of doing the right thing. They're being very logical here, and that's quite gratifying to see for something of this vintage. Bit of a flub. This is pretty tense. And that's the other thing as well, is because the editing was done live in the studio. It's pretty impressive in sequences where they are using editing to increase and ratchet up the tension. To do that live, I mean, assuming that was the case here. I mean, I do believe I asked on the last episode that it was predominantly done live and edited on the fly, but there was some small provision for post-production, particularly in music and optical credits. Apparently, some insert shots. I think things like this, maybe things that involve props, were maybe done in, I guess, what we'd call second unit and edited in. But I think even those, from what one of the commentators was saying, was that even they, despite being shot separately, were still integrated live during that kind of on-the-fly cut that would be done in the studio. So that's very impressive. This episode's Barbara Meltdown. Sorry, Susan Meltdown. Although maybe Barbara will have one as well. It's early days. Very patient, aren't they, Daleks? I like the fact that the list round as well. That's, again, all of these kind of design aesthetics make sense to the Daleks, or seem to me at least. There we go. Cut through the sparkler. Yeah, you go in. I hope his cardigan's alright. There he is.
See over there? There's the edge of the petrified jungle. Yes. Tried to recognize the streets we came along.
The Petrified Jungle. There's an episode title.
Do you see anything at all that looks like that sort of gateway thing beyond the
Is it the Aryan Brotherhood?
I saw someone cross that.
Exterminated. You understand?
Is that the thing?
Exterminated. I understand.
The Daleks are such dicks, aren't they? So it looks like there's no genuine attempt at reconciliation or cohabitation here, unfortunately, for the Thals, who are rather innocently walking in. You're sort of the younger, virile hero and the older, sort of crotchety science figure. It's got a kind of almost Jules Vernean feeling, particularly, those Jules Verne film adaptations that were done in the 60s and 70s, I think they were. It just feels very akin of that. I can almost see the Ian character being the Doug McClure character in some of those movies. Nice, you sabotage those Daleks. This reminds me of the Quorum in the original Battlestar Galactica, kind of like, yeah, the Cylons are cool, let's make friends with them and drop our defences. And you got Lorne Greene saying, have you learnt nothing about their caddish, treacherous ways? I think this is again another early example of this sci-fi trope. And as somebody who grew up on television and movie science fiction in the 70s and 80s, one of the things that's really interesting about this is seeing, if not the formative examples of these tropes, but certainly a very early example, and definitely a very early television example of these tropes.
These Daleks, and you must throw off these suspicions. They are based on fear. Fear breeds hatred and war.
It's such a shame, because ethically what he's saying is right. It's naive, and we know this, but fear is a bad thing and can cause us to act xenophobically and be insular, but sometimes fear's smart and correct, and in this instance, he's definitely one of those.
I shall speak to them peacefully. They'll see that I'm unarmed. There's no better argument against war than that.
Okay, let's see how that goes.
Yes.
Great music. Sort of background sound. Very modern. And very, very of a piece with that, as I say, that sort of very Germanic design aesthetic, that minimalist, electronic, almost like Kraftwerky kind of Kafkaesque aesthetic. Is everything's very consistent in this episode, and I think it really creates a tone. And I think that even though audiences might not have been sophisticated enough at the time to intellectualize that when they were watching it, I'm sure they felt it. Running. So that's the other thing I know about Doctor Who. Lots of running. Again, the actor who plays Ian, very solid. Can convey in silence as well, a bit like Hartnell. All the cast are great. They're all asked to do different things, and they all do those things very well. Great costume design as well. It may look a little bit hokey now, but it's not. It's not Baco foil. It's not shiny silver. And I think the whole Aryan thing as well. I mean, if you think about things like the Midwich Cuckoo, which would be made as Village of the Damned, the blonde-haired Aryan children as science fiction horror trope. This was very much a thing at the time, I believe.
Daleks! Can you hear me?
And Star Trek did this as well. Star Trek had, David Soul in a bright blonde wig,
All people wish to live in peace.
doing a similar thing.
We need your help.
Oh, it's sad.
We'll make the soil live again.
It's the idealism not rewarded. Yeah, Ian knows which way the wind's blowing. Oh no. The 360-degree vision's letting them down a bit there.
Each of these bursts is a tiny section of another solar system. So the total picture.
Total? Oh, you have records of other systems?
It's great to see the Doctor in the process of acquiring his knowledge as well. We've heard a lot about his almost sociopathic thirst for knowledge at the cost of safety of himself and his companions sometimes. So it's good to see him actually, assimilating some of this.
Well, I see too.
Somebody in the comments also pointed out, I was talking about how impressive it was with all of the dance that they must have to have done in the studio to capture these episodes. How impressive it is often that the camera movements will often end with a zoom in on a character, and how difficult that must have been. And it was pointed out to me that they didn't actually zoom. That was achieved by physically moving this giant camera in on the person. So, again, doth my cap, that makes it even more of a feat.
Dislike for the unlike? I don't follow.
Yeah, that's, again, coming at this as a Star Trek fan, this sort of broad morality is really interesting. This idea of just beings where it's inconceivable that somebody would, the idiocy of the fear of the other,
They're afraid of you because you're different from. What would you do if the Daleks could leave their city? If they came up here and attacked you? We would go away back to our plateau where we came from.
Simply run away.
this sort of withdrawing disgust is not the same as apathy kind of thing. Is I think tied in with some of the other things that we're seeing about the youth culture, the youth movement maybe. Again, I know very little about Doctor Who, so I may be way off on this. This is just what I'm getting. But this idea, we're introduced to Susan listening to some rock and roll, some sort of Mersey beat kind of sounding music. This was obviously the rise of the Beatles, that second wave of rock and roll that came out of England, came out of Liverpool and London. And the idea of pacifism, we're already 8 years or so into the rise of the teenager as kind of a recognised consumer demographic, and therefore living in capitalism. That's what gives voice to people. So teenagers were starting to get a voice because they were starting to be perceived as viable consumers. And I guess that, and then with the record, the music industry, and I think film as well were really big parts of that. And what that does, of course, is it results in activism and political idealism, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that here. You know, the idea that maybe fighting isn't always a solution, but at the same time, there's an exploration here of the fact that how that can be admirable but naive. So it's pretty even-handed at the moment, which is interesting.
Pacifism only works when everybody feels the same.
Wow, cynical.
I mean, genuine.
Probably right there.
Oh, it's all there.
Dars and Thals.
Oh dear boy, now please come along. You know I can't start the ship without it.
Bugger.
Wait, Link.
You've lost it?
It's down there somewhere.
Drat. Love that soundtrack. Oh, look at Hartnell. What a great face there. Oh, that was a really solid ending. That's one of my favourite episodes so far. It just felt really pacey. And I've got to say as well, I mean, I was worried that the Aryan Brotherhood, the Thals, although there are female characters in there as well, to be fair, I thought that might end up being a little bit like the cavemen, you know, and it is in a sense, but I just think that they're much more interesting, they're more dynamic characters, and I think that I guess the early 60s discourse around pessimism versus pragmatism is interesting. And it's, again, there's tension, there's action, there's a bit of world building, a little bit more information about the evolution of the Daleks. Yeah, I'm all in. I'm really enjoying this. I can't wait for the expedition, the next episode. And it's clear where we're going as well. We know they have to go back and get this. So there's I think this is probably the strongest sense of momentum that the show has had at this point, and it's going to be the one where it's going to be the most difficult for me to just not plough straight into the next episode, but I need to start work shortly, so I will stop for now and just remind you that I appreciate comments on the YouTube channel. Please check out the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike, the audio podcast that I do. We put that up on YouTube, but there's also a podcast feed for that on Spotify and all of your favourite podcatchers. But for now, I am out, and I will see you soon.